April 1945. The guns of World War II in Europe were falling silent. Cities lay in ruins, armies were exhausted, and millions had already paid the ultimate price. But in the quiet forests of central Germany, something was waiting that would shake even the hardest soldiers to their core. A group of American troops from the 4th Armored Division and the 89th Infantry Division pushed forward through the countryside. They were battle-hardened men who had fought across France and survived the brutal Battle of the Bulge. They thought they had seen the worst that war could offer. They were wrong. On April 4th, these soldiers approached a small railway junction near the town of Ohrdruf. What they discovered behind the barbed wire fences wasn't just another prisoner camp. It was a place where humanity had been systematically erased. The smell hit them first, a thick, sickening stench that clung to everything. Then came the sights that no training could ever prepare them for. Rows of wooden barracks stood silent under the spring sky. Inside and around them lay hundreds upon hundreds of emaciated bodies, stacked like discarded firewood. Some were partially burned in hurried attempts to hide the evidence. Others lay exactly where they had collapsed from starvation, disease, or outright murder. The ground itself seemed poisoned by suffering. As the first American soldiers moved deeper into the camp, they found more horrors. There were whipping posts still stained with blood, devices designed purely for torture, evidence of medical experiments that defied any sense of decency. In one shed, soldiers discovered a pile of nearly 30 naked, skeletal bodies, sprinkled with lime in a failed effort to mask the overwhelming odor of death. These were not soldiers who had died in combat. These were men, women, and even some children who had been worked to death, starved, beaten, and executed simply because of who they were or what they believed. Ohrdruf was a subcamp of the larger Buchenwald system, but it was the first major Nazi concentration camp that American forces would liberate, and it would change how the world understood the true scale of evil unfolding in the heart of Europe. Word of the discovery spread quickly up the chain of command. Soon, one of the most famous and feared American generals in the entire war was on his way. General George S. Patton, the man known as Old Blood and Guts. He was legendary for his aggressive style, his ivory-handled pistols, his foul language, and his unbreakable will to attack. Patton had led men through the deserts of North Africa, the mountains of Sicily, and the bloody fields of France. He feared almost nothing on the battlefield. But on that April day, in 1945, even Patton would be tested like never before. When Patton arrived at the camp, he walked through the gates expecting the grim realities of war. He had seen death many times. He had seen men torn apart by artillery and machine guns. Yet nothing in his long military career had prepared him for what awaited inside Ohrdruf. According to those who stood beside him, Patton took only a few steps before his face turned pale. He stopped, turned away, and vomited violently against the side of a building. This was the same man who had cursed his troops into victory across multiple continents. The same commander who demanded absolute toughness from everyone around him. Yet the sheer horror of stacked bodies, the evidence of deliberate starvation, and the industrial-scale cruelty broke through even his iron resolve. Patton wasn't alone in his reaction. Other high-ranking officers who arrived with him also struggled to process what they were seeing. But Patton, true to his character, didn't simply turn away and leave. Instead, a cold fury took over. He looked at the local German officials who had been brought to the scene and made a decision that would become one of the most powerful and controversial moments of the entire liberation. He gave a direct and uncompromising order. Every able-bodied civilian from the nearby town of Ohrdruf, shopkeepers, farmers, teachers, doctors, bankers, and especially the town's leading citizens, will be brought to the camp. No excuses, no exceptions. The mayor, his wife, and other prominent residents were specifically included. Patton wanted them to see with their own eyes what had been happening right next to their quiet town for years. Hundreds of ordinary German civilians were rounded up and marched through the gates under American escort. Many of them walked in with expressions of disbelief or even irritation at being forced from their daily lives. But as they moved deeper into the camp, That attitude began to crumble. They were led past the open pits filled with bodies, past the barracks where people had been left to die in their own filth, past the charred remains of those the SS had tried to burn before fleeing. Some civilians began to cry openly. Others stared in stunned silence, their faces drained of color. A few tried to look away or deny what was right in front of them, whispering that this must be exaggerated or staged. But the evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. The smell, the bodies, the torture devices, the stories beginning to emerge from the few surviving prisoners. It all painted a picture of systematic, industrialized cruelty that had been operating for years, often with the quiet knowledge or willful ignorance of the local population. Patton's intention was crystal clear. He wanted to destroy the convenient excuse of "we didn't know" once and for all. He believed that if people lived so close to such horror and chose not to see it, they needed to be confronted with the truth in the most direct way possible. The forced tour lasted for hours. American soldiers watched carefully as the civilians moved through the nightmare. Some Germans appeared genuinely shocked and horrified. Others seemed numb, as if their minds were refusing to accept the reality. The atmosphere was heavy with tension, shame, and a growing sense of collective guilt. That night, the town of Ohrdruf must have felt different. The illusion of normal life had been violently shattered. The very next morning, on April 5th, American troops received shocking news from the town. The mayor and his wife had been found dead in their own home. They had chosen to end their lives rather than live with what they had been forced to witness. A simple note was discovered, expressing that they could no longer bear the shame of what had happened in their community, right under their noses. When soldiers read that note, even the most seasoned among them stood in silence. This single tragic act spoke volumes. It proved that when the truth was dragged into the light, at least some people could no longer hide behind denial. The mayor's suicide became a powerful symbol of the moment when ignorance was no longer an option. But the story of Ohrdruf was far from over. A week later, on April 12th, the highest levels of American command arrived. Supreme Allied Commander General Dwight D. Eisenhower flew in personally, accompanied by General Omar Bradley and again by General Patton. Eisenhower wanted to see everything with his own eyes. He walked through every corner of the camp. He spoke with surviving prisoners through interpreters. He examined the whipping racks, the piles of bodies, and the evidence of mass murder. Eisenhower later described the experience as something that beggared description. He said the visual evidence and the stories of starvation, cruelty, and bestiality were so overpowering that they left him physically sick. Yet he forced himself to see it all because he understood something very important. He knew that in the future, some people might try to dismiss these horrors as mere propaganda or exaggeration. So Eisenhower made a deliberate choice. He ordered photographers and film crews to document every detail. He commanded as many American soldiers as possible, those not on the front lines, to visit the camp themselves. He wanted the truth preserved so completely that no one could ever deny it. Patton, who had already vomited on his first visit, stood once again among the horror. His presence sent a clear message. Even the toughest warriors of the war could not escape the moral weight of what had been discovered. Ohrdruf was not the largest or the most infamous camp. It was a forced labor subcamp where prisoners were worked to death rather than gassed in industrial killing facilities. Yet, because it was the first major camp liberated by Western Allied forces, it became a turning point in how the free world began to understand the full scope of Nazi crimes. In the weeks that followed, similar horrors would be uncovered at Buchenwald, Dachau, Bergen-Belsen, and many others. But Ohrdruf set the tone. It forced the Allies to confront the fact that this was not just a war between armies. It was a war against an ideology that had turned human beings into disposable labor and then into corpses. The civilians who were forced to walk through the camp that day carried the memory with them for the rest of their lives. Some spoke about it later in interviews or letters. Others remained silent, perhaps burdened by guilt or trauma. The event became part of the larger process of denazification in post-war Germany, the difficult effort to make an entire society face what had been done in its name. Today, more than 80 years later, this story still carries powerful lessons. It reminds us how easy it can be for ordinary people to look away when evil happens nearby. It shows how denial can thrive when we choose comfort over uncomfortable truth. It asks each of us, if something terrible was happening in our own neighborhood, would we have the courage to see it? Or would we tell ourselves, I didn't know? The danger of willful ignorance didn't end in 1945. In our modern world, with so much information available at our fingertips, we still face moments where we must choose between looking away and facing reality, whether it's human rights abuses, systemic cruelty, or rising extremism. Ohrdruf stands as a permanent warning. Evil doesn't always announce itself with loud fanfare. Sometimes it hides behind fences, behind official paperwork, behind convenient excuses. And when good people choose silence or denial, it grows stronger. General Patton, the man who vomited at the gates but refused to turn away, showed a different path. He chose confrontation with the truth, no matter how sickening. Eisenhower chose documentation and preservation so the world could never forget. Their actions in those April days helped ensure that the victims' suffering would not be erased from history. As the war ended just a few weeks later, Germany surrendered unconditionally. The full scale of the concentration camp system shocked the entire planet. Trials would follow at Nuremberg, where the evidence gathered from places like Ohrdruf played a crucial role in delivering justice. But for the soldiers who liberated the camp, for the civilians who were forced to see it, and for the few survivors who lived to tell their stories, April 1945 was a dividing line in their lives. Before Ohrdruf and after Ohrdruf, this single camp, this single forced tour, this single moment of a general vomiting against a wall, it all became part of a larger moral awakening. It helped shape the post-war world. Order, the creation of international laws against genocide, and the ongoing commitment to never forget. We remember Ohrdruf not because it was the worst camp, but because it was the first one the Western Allies fully confronted. It was the moment when the abstract reports of Nazi atrocities became undeniable, visual, and deeply personal reality. If this story has moved you, if it has made you think differently about the responsibility we all carry to confront evil when we see it, then I ask you to do 3 things right now. First, hit the like button if you believe stories like this must continue to be told. Second, leave a comment with the word "never forget" so we know this message reached you. And third, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. In the coming videos, we will dive even deeper into the untold and often uncomfortable stories from World War II. Stories that textbooks often skip, but that shape the world we live in today. The next video will explore another dark chapter that still affects how we view justice and memory in our modern times. Thank you for watching till the end. In a world full of noise, taking time to remember these moments matters more than ever. Stay curious, stay honest, and never look away from the truth. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.